up on the funeral pyre and therefore in the urns.
Sometimes we get bits of the animal or bits of the human.
Cortex tends to be more dense and often thicker than a human bone.
Many of the Carthage urns excavated back in the 1970s also contained a mixture of animal, bird and human bones. But why? The evidence can be interpreted in totally different ways. There's no dispute that the Phoenicians sacrificed animals in the Tophet. So one theory is that the animals and children were sacrificed at the same ceremonies. The result was that their cremated remains got mixed up on the funeral pyre and therefore in the urns.
Sometimes we get bits of the animal or bits of the human together in the same jar, and it's unlikely that this is an intentional interment in the jar, but just an accident of scraping off the pyre.
But for other academics, it's no accident. They believed the Phoenicians deliberately sacrificed birds and animals when they cremated newborn babies who had died of natural causes.
Inside the urns, mixed up with the children's bones, we also find the bones of small animals which were sacrificed during the cremation ceremony. The sacrifice of these small birds or lambs was meant to accompany the child to the other side, to the next life.
This might explain the urns with mixed remains, but many of the Carthage urns only contained animal bones.
In some of these jars, for example, in this one, there wasn't a baby in there at all, only a lamb. So my question to those who claim that this is just an infant cemetery, that is only for children who died of natural causes, why in the world then are they burying their pets?
The archaeological debate goes on, but back in Motia, there's been a breakthrough that may help solve the mystery. Charlotte Roberts has found human teeth, an important indicator of general health. If they show signs of disease, then the children could have died from natural causes and not in a sacrificial rite.
The teeth survive very well during burial, much better than the bones, so we do get quite a lot of evidence for dental disease. What we term metabolic diseases, so disorders of normal metabolism, things like anemia, rickets, vitamin D deficiency, scurvy, vitamin C deficiency.
Metabolic disorders could affect dental development, so Charlotte uses the microscope to look for defects in the enamel. After careful scrutiny, she's prepared to reach some conclusions.
On the basis of what I've seen, there's no dental defects in these teeth from the...
A man and a woman as a point of comparison.
Yes, you've got the male, 2 bands from modern DNA. That's the female, modern DNA, 1 band. And that's the ancient DNA, and we see 1 band there, so...
That's marvellous, and it's a girl!
That's great.
All the blanks have been blank here.
It's a real result. Great. Well done.
Çin'in o aşkın, o erkek kırgınçılıklara dünya görüyor ama ses vermiyor. Sükut duruyor yani. Biz çok üzülüyoruz.
Bu Türk'ün davası değil, Müslümanın davası değil. Bu Yahudinin davası değil. İnsanlığın davası. Biz Uygur olduğumuz için bu davanı biz için yardım için yapın demiyoruz. Ama insan olsa, kalbi olsa, aklı olsa yapmak zorunda. Dili olmasa.
Hani böyle bir raporun hani 2022'nin ortalarında değil de 2019-2018'de yayınlanan rapordan hemen sonra hani çok acil bir araştırmaya ihtiyacı vardı.
But it's a very disappointing result for the advocates of the child sacrifice theory.
I don't want to make too much of that evidence until it's been further studied. And we continue to do more work on these bones because we're learning much more, even though it's now several decades since we did our excavations in Carthage.
The Israeli team are now embarking on a massive study. Over the next 5 years, they hope to conduct DNA tests on hundreds of Carthage infants. If they find a fairly even mix of both boys and girls, Professor Bartolone will be proved right, and the Roman and Greek accounts of child sacrifice would be fiction. But the advocates of the child sacrifice theory are pinning their hopes on finding a disproportionate number of either girls or boys.
If we have a great predominance of young girls, this would fit in with the bias that we might have in the ancient world of young girls being undervalued by society, so that it would be easier and less painful for the family to sacrifice a girl than a boy. If the predominance are boys, then this would fit in with the notion of the supreme sacrifice of the young firstborn male.
The absence of disease in the teeth and the age of the children analysed so far suggested that child sacrifice did indeed occur. But the discovery of a female child has thrown these findings into confusion. It may take several more years for science to finally discover whether there was children's blood on the altar.
Casting Natural Gloss, your drama-free.
I was in the China Communist Public Security Criminal Investigation Department for 10 years.
Soldier, policeman, and now defector. This man says he was an enforcer for the Chinese government, first in the army, then working as a detective.
I'm from the Public Security Bureau. I'm protecting the regime. If you're the enemy, there's no need for any courtesy.
He was dispatched to Xinjiang, where everyone was treated as the enemy, and there was no need for courtesy.
It's reached a state of wartime control. When I got there, more than 900,000 people had already been detained for numerous petty.
China used to deny that these places exist. But now we're being given a tour. The message? These are schools, not prisons.
他们受到一定的极端思想感染以后，为了就是把自己思想里面的极端思想的感染程度去除。
But the more we ask, have you been convicted of a crime?
我没有犯罪，我就是犯了错。
How often are you able to pray here?
国家法律规定学校公共场所，公共场所不能从事宗教活动。
The more evidence we try to gather of our own, the more questions there are.
Afrika er demokratisk bøsse.
Putin
er der for meget at følge med i. Hvis du lytter til Politikken, kan du snakke med ved kaffemaskinen, ved middagsbordet eller i baren. Lyt med i Politikens podcast-app eller der, hvor du hører din podcast.
Bienvenue à tous. Welcome to Reporters Plus here on France 24. I'm Marco, and in this edition, China's crackdown on the Muslim Uyghur minority. Human rights campaigners say that over 1 million people have been interned in concentration camps in the far west province of Xinjiang. According to Beijing, the official Chinese line on this is that the Uyghurs are voluntarily signing up to re-education programs. In reality, entire families are forced out of their homes, their houses left empty, and they disappear overnight. Our reporters Angélique Fauché and Antoine Védier have travelled to Xinjiang many times to film our special report. China doesn't like Western journalists asking questions there. They've also been as far afield as Canada, Kazakhstan, Turkey, and even here in France to gather first-hand testimony about the treatment of Uyghurs at the hands of the Chinese. This is their report.
Look. They're just gonna grab her? There's not like a blanket or anything? No? Okay. Pretty basic. Just because this guy evidently knows her, and I think in this case it's just kind of a weirder form of popping the question, it feels like. At the same time, it's an extremely troubling institution.
With the plan locked in place and the bridal yurt set up for the reception, all that was left for Kubanti and his pals was to go secure the bride.
Boğaz. Bitpесе тилеги келечеги аябай жакшы болчу да. Дагы эме кылып кетти окшойт ошо. Анан ошо эметип кетти го. Апа болуп өзү. Aslında көп plandaштырылган немелери баары бар эле. Пландардын баары аткарылбай калбады. Түн үчүндө ала качып кеттир, биз жокту. Ошол күнү а күнү түнү менен издеп таппайбыз. Эртеси түш огондон кийин саат 3-төрдө таап келдик. Таап алып келсек, айылдын ичинен бир аталаш эжелерибиз бир айыл эмесиңерби, кыргызчылык эмеспи, бергиле деп кыргыздын илгерки салтына салып бердирген. Кайра бир элсиңер, бир жерсиңер кыргызчылык эмеспи, бергиле деп кыргызчылык менен кайра бергенбиз. 9 март күнү саат 4-төрдө эметип алыптыр. Сүйүн деген сүйлөшкөн баласы болчу. Давлетта сүйлөшкөн баласы болчу. Чанып отурган куу жетимге туш келбеди. Баланын түшүнүгү начар, мындайынан билимсиз, билим албай калыптыр эне. Кичинекей кругта жүрүп калыптыр, мындай эмеси жок. Балам капа болчу эметип алдым. Ошончо группалаштарын ошончо мен ичинин баарынан эме кылды да, баламды шагы сындырды да. Ошо ызасына чыдаган жок, элдин көбүнчө басынтып койду.
With the plan locked in place and the bridal yurt set up for the reception, all that was left for Kubanti and his pals was to go secure the bride. Cities in recent years, generally attributed to the success of Ernest Appy-Yabarov's 2007 pro-kidnapping film, Baz Salkin.
Радиодон ошол ЗАГСтын немесе интервью берип атты, көрсө 5-чи төрөлгөн кыздын атын Асема коюп атышыптыр да. Ушунчалык популярдуу болду да.
Абыл Касымдын үйү ушулбу? Ооба. Колдугубуз бар.
Оштун мэри мынтип айткан. Ой, сен элдер кыргыздар кыз ала качат турбай деп ойлоп калат да, буну эмне чыгардың деп так айткан да. Чындыкты жымсалдоонун аракети болсо керек деген. Бул жерде жанагы биздин бүгүнкү күндө ошого каршы мен оюмча ошо ала качуу ыкмасы ошо бирден бир ошо туруштук берүү, ошого бир протест катары өзүнөн өзү мындай өнүгүп атышынын бирден бир себеби ушул болуп атат да. Биздин ала качуу жолун мындай сындаганы менен өздөрү бизге ошондой бир институтту мындай тартуулап бере алган жок да. Эркин сүйүү, ошол эле мисалы линерикалык оорулар, СПИД, ажырашуулар, ата энесиз калган балдар, сойкулук, баңгизаттык ошонун баары бизге батыштан келип атат да, бизде мунду жок болчу илгери.
жаш кичинекей кыздарыбыздын өз өмүрүнө өзү кыйып аткандыгы жөнүндө өтүп жатат. Ошондуктан сиздерден өтүнүчүм, урматтуу мына бул жерде турган аталар, апалар болсо.
Spousal abuse is higher in kidnapped marriages. Divorce rate is higher in kidnapped marriages. There's a higher percentage of women who go through that process who wind up rejected by families and going into prostitution. And suicide rates are higher among women who are kidnapped.
Bir ayılda turabız. Bir ayıldan içinden kızımның көңілі жоқ жашап жүріп, 3 айға жетпей өзінің өмірін қиды. Мұндай арты емне қи, дағылы қи.
Freiburg. She knows Germany well. She often visited her foster parents here.
Some time before that.
Dass vorher mal irgendwann im Waisenhaus gewesen ist. Und
Willi made a completely normal impression. There didn't seem to be anything unusual.
Were rejected.
Denen wurde das dann verweigert.
And they were going to have me marry the son so that the community thought that the son was good. It was a sham wedding. It was very rushed. I was very young, but my father and he started to make a trade for me. They placed a silk.
Milena is represented as as mentioned. The mistress's power lies in her appeal, and the women strip Milena of what makes her appealing to their husbands. They cut her hair until she is haggard and beat her until her face is bloodied, bruised, and swollen. By doing so, they strip Milena of what they perceive to be her power. Susan Sontag further highlights women's superficial power in relation to beauty is a perceived threat to their worth as women. A woman's worth is defined by her youth, beauty, and purity within a patriarchal culture. This is why they previously attacked her purity by spreading rumors of her being promiscuous and sleeping with many men, and
absolument perdante. Et non seulement celle qui ne satisfait pas son mari, mais qui en même temps est prise de fureur utérine. C'est un peu le terme consacré par un pamphlet contre la reine Marie-Antoinette. Ces images sont absolument désastreuses pour l'image de la reine. L'image
But the verdict was a ringing denunciation of her way of life.
I think the diamond necklace affair was made possible because Marie Antoinette was already seen as somebody who would do anything to get a new diamond. It's because Marie Antoinette was seen as a frivolous.
Crude, vicious, increasingly obscene. They found an eager audience. The royal censor seemed powerless to stop them.
There's a huge smuggling industry of semi-legal or totally illegal pamphlet literature coming out of Holland, coming out of London, coming out of Switzerland. A group of extremely unscrupulous, kind of scandalmonger journalists.
Han var Dr. H, og han kørte med klatten.
Lad os sige.
In the wake of the Second World War,
Not a suit.
Und nicht mit dem Anzug. In der Vergangenheit.
Born in Berlin in 1925, Theodor Vanya Michael was one of the few surviving black witnesses of the Nazi era, until his death in 2019. Market. The movies.
In der Vergangenheit.
Born in Berlin in 1925, Theodor Vanya Michael was one of the few surviving black witnesses of the Nazi era. Their citizenship.
Theodor Vanya Michael was issued an alien's passport and was rendered stateless. He lost his job at a hotel. Finding work became nearly impossible. One of the few exceptions was a niche market, the movies. The most expensive film of the Nazi era, Munchausen, required many black extras to play servants in a Turkish palace. The roles conformed to degrading stereotypes that furthered the Nazis' racist ideology. The young Theodor Vanya Michael played the Sultan's fanning boy. Only later did he realize he'd been exploited.
Unterdrückt in dem Sinne, als ich nie
exploited in the sense that I never played a positive role.
durchaus positive
I was only ever decoration. They needed exotic people.
Man brauchte die Exoten.
They needed us, and today we know we were exploited.
Dass man missbraucht wurde.
The notion of white supremacy was celebrated in many Nazi colonial films. The regime had plans to reconquer former overseas colonies. Quacks in Africa was one of many films to degrade black people and use overtly racist dialogue.
Die Brüder, die kenne ich doch. Die habe ich schon mal in Berliner Zoo gesehen.
In this clip, the protagonist gestures to the people approaching and says he's seen them before, quote, at the Berlin Zoo. Afro-German actors were routinely cast in such roles. The medicine man was played by Louis Brody, the grandfather of Abena Adomako.
My family and a large number of African people here only survived the Nazi era because they were needed for these German colonial films.
From 1939 onwards, daily life became increasingly dangerous.
And they were going to test child, so everyone wouldn't touch. My jaw. They had broken my arm, and I was in a lot of pain. So my parents originate from the Punjab in North India. They came over in the 1960s, and I always say that they packed very tightly their cultural beliefs. And unfortunately for me,
there were all manner of theories intended to prove this. Theories now seem as unscientific, of course, but back then, they were considered scientific fact.
The photographs that Lohmeyer delivered were precisely what his employers wanted. They showed the indigenous population of Africa as being comprised of a variety of tribes and ethnic groups who differed in terms of appearance, character, and degree of civilization.
Es gab eben diese Vorstellung auch der Family of Man, dass der weiße Mann auf der
There was the notion of the family of man, with the white man up at the top and all other colors lower down, the Asians in the middle, and at the bottom, black people. Then on the lowest rung were the San, for example, referred to as Bushmen. There were all manner of theories intended to prove this. Theories now seem as unscientific, of course, but back then they were considered scientific fact by anthropologists and ethnologists.
Geglaubt worden und als Wissenschaft betrachtet worden.
This is the Lutheran Church in Windhoek.
Today I renounce all forms of violence and terror, along with the objectives in the manifesto, and I give you my word of honour that this is behind me forever. But
continued belief in the far-right ideology that inspired his crimes. The 42-year-old is asking for release on probation as the minimum period of his sentence is up.
Today I renounce all forms of violence and terror, along with the objectives in the manifesto, and I give you my word of
Rygestop er hårdt. Ny vitamin C. YouTube Premium.
I'm DCI staff.
If someone is going to be resurrected, then they have to have lost something of themselves, be changed in some sort of way, and this does seem to be his thinking. He's said this is what he thinks before. In the show, the Red Wedding happens. It's awful and Catelyn is killed. In the books, however, she comes back a few days later. Her murdered corpse is dumped into the river, only for Arya's direwolf Nymeria to find it and pull her from the river, where Beric Dondarrion and his Brotherhood Without Banners then come across her. Beric Dondarrion, who has been brought back from death multiple times, feeling less and less himself each time, now opts to give his life for good in exchange for Catelyn's. Which probably could have been quite touching if Catelyn didn't come back to life so much darker than she was before. Unable to speak from where her throat was previously cut, she now assumes leadership of the Brotherhood Without Banners and leads them on a merciless quest of vengeance to capture and execute anyone who played a hand in the events of the Red Wedding. Well, more than that, actually. She executes any Lannisters, Freys or Boltons, even if they had nothing to do with it, no matter what age they are. He is not me. Tywin as well, actually. I think Cersei idealises him as something perfect that maybe is an idea out under the illusion of perfection. A total perfection they have to keep pushing and investing in, otherwise the cracks of what they feel deep down might start to break through. Cersei has to craft an image for herself as
revolution. As the court society that had funded and built many of the grandest automata collapsed, these extraordinary machines would begin to change again. Automata became highly sought-after commodities in the newly emerging worlds of global trade. Surviving automaton. Developing the cams. Devices would be built that contained whole stacks of miniaturized cams. At his core is a great stack of cams. As these cams move, 3 cam followers read their
Kom stærkt.
Afrika, Sverige. Afrika, Sverige.
3 fyre, der står der stadigvæk, og så råber den ene sådan, du kommer nok i børnehuset, din luder. Og så er det altså nok, hun går ind til sin far, og faren skriver til politimesteren, at der bliver rejst en sag mod de her 3 fyre der. De er så i øvrigt også kendt for, at politiet de har ikke særlig meget at have det der med at være moralens vogtere i, fordi de er kendt for forskellige former for småhælerier, tuskhandel og alt muligt andet. Og der er der også en af dem, som har siddet i fængsel, og sådan det ene med det andet. Men de kan ikke overbevise, som der står i kilden om, at de rent faktisk har råbt det der og generet hende på den her måde. Men man kan da i hvert fald give dem nogle dage på vand og brød for at overtræde et polititilhold, de har imod at stå og hænge på det der hjørne. Det her øgenavn har åbenbart, det har hun ikke været.
Men, and once they had the opportunity, they attacked her beauty by viciously beating her and cutting her hair. To reference back to the Madonna and the whore complex, most of the women within the town who dislike Milena are Madonnas. They are mothers and wives. Their worth is in the home. Though Milena is represented from the fact that they identify themselves with each other, but for the same reason, each is against the other.
Decide they can really make a fortune by slagging her off, as we would say in the British Isles.
Unusual. To begin with, I never thought there was something different about him.
From today's point of view, that was a blatant judicial error.
Alodia Vitashek is on her way to the city of Freiburg. She knows Germany well. She often visited her foster parents here.
The history of the Bavarian town of Landsberg am Lech is inextricably linked with that of Nazism. It was here, during his incarceration in the town's prison in 1924.
That meant that girls were not wanted or desired, but boys were. So I was looked upon as a bad entity, almost like a witch or a possessed child. So everyone wouldn't touch me or welcome me or hold me because they felt I was carrying bad spirits.
Were you the only girl in your household?
So I'm the youngest of 3. I have 2 older brothers, and I'm the only girl born in my immediate family, but also the only girl in my extended family, with my father being one of 7 brothers.
Hej, mit navn er Jonas.
Of the Sultan.
They were slaves not of Turkish extraction.
The type that Turkish men like is what we call balaketli. Flesh firm like a fish. And another detail. They say ayva gabai.
There were older women who watched over the younger girls to make sure that they weren't getting into any kind of a mischief, such as talking in the dark.
A handkerchief was just another item of laundry.
Very few of them ever got to see the Sultan, let alone jump into his bed. I mean, in order to get anywhere, not just be...
Who would produce the next ruler of the Ottoman Empire? The new favourite, Hürrem, or the old favourite, Mahidevran?
Mahidevran was the mother of the oldest son. So that Hürrem coming in, obviously being the Sultan's new favorite, was a threat to her.
According to Venetian report, Mahidevran picked a fight with Hürrem and called her soiled meat.
A piece of meat off the slave market. And this provoked a physical struggle between them. Hurrem's face was scratched, her hair was pulled.
And the next time the Sultan called for Hurrem, she replied she was unworthy of his attention since she was soiled meat.
And of course this intrigues Suleiman, piques his curiosity, and he calls her again. And she tells the whole story, of course, with Mahidevran appearing as the bad guy. Here's an early sign of Hurrem's intelligence and ability to manipulate the whole palace system.
The murderous struggle for the succession had continued after Hurrem died in 1558. It was her son Selim who made it to the throne 8 years later. His favourite, Nurbanu, meaning Princess of Light,
And talk about a kind of a firming up of the hierarchy of women in the harem. At the very bottom, we've got your basic servants, people who boil the water for the laundry, put the coal in the furnace, this kind of service. Then I think we need to think of it as bifurcating into a reproductive, a kind of a concubine tract, and an administrative tract. There's a management team in this harem. Chief officer of the harem is a woman called the harem stewardess, and she's got her own staff. She carries the keys. She's in charge of all the various service divisions within the harem.
Telenor præsenterer Nets.
Kom, bro. Jeg skal lige tjekke. Nej, du...
You have to think how the women we know about got to where they got.
Day-to-day running of the empire, so on their succession as Sultan, they really knew very little about politics, which may be one reason, of course, why their mothers were so important, because
lions and tigers are locked.
Arslan Kaplan.
Mothers of Ottoman princes call their sons Aslan, lion.
Genellikle Arslan deniyordu anneleri tarafından.
So when a place in the harem was built for them to be locked up, they called it kafes, because princes, like lions, were locked in there.
These were gilded, beautiful apartments in the harem, where they could live for years, just waiting, never knowing from one day to the next what was going to happen to them, never knowing whether their brother might be deposed and they might be pulled out and made sultan themselves, never knowing whether the mutes might come in with a bowstring and finish them off.
Talk to the Queen Mother about affairs of state. The Queen Mother herself couldn't then come out into the male quarters and discuss the thing.
Men, and once they had the opportunity, they attacked her beauty by viciously beating her and cutting her hair. To reference back to the Madonna in the Whore complex, most of the women within the town who dislike Malena are Madonnas. They are mothers and wives. Their worth is in the home. The stands, and as she does, she is shaking violently. The women in the crowd yell at Malena. "Get lost," one woman shouts. "Disappear," yells another. Malena runs away from the crowd crying. Simone realized, and Malena became the seductress the town mythologized. The town is later liberated from Nazi occupation by American soldiers. The town celebrates the liberation with cheers and festivities. The women of the town band together and plot to destroy Malena. "Let's go give that shameless whore what she deserves," one woman yells.
Well, leave the wealth of Arrakis to someone who's dead.
What wealth? Every communique brings news of another Fremen raid. By the time my idiot of a brother is...
Do you really take me for that much of a fool, boy?
I don't understand, Uncle.
What kind of poison did you choose, boy? Something slow and painful, I assume? So you could watch, eh? Tell me, Fade, why didn't you simply assassinate me yourself? You had plenty of opportunity to. You taught me.
From today's point of view, that was a blatant judicial error.
Józef Sowa travels as often as he can to the place where his parents are buried. It lies outside Częstochowa in southern Poland.
Party King.
Tragic legal mistake.
Unusual. To begin with, I never thought there was something different about him.
A whole world collapsed in November 1918.
Bienvenue à tous. Welcome to Reporters Plus here on France 24. I'm Mark Owen. In this edition, China's crackdown on the Muslim Uyghur minority. Human rights campaigners say that over 1 million people have been interned in concentration camps in the far west province of Xinjiang. According to Beijing, the official Chinese line on this is that the Uyghurs are voluntarily signing up to re-education programs. In reality, entire families are forced out of their homes, their houses left empty, and they disappear overnight. Our reporters Angélique Forget and Antoine Védier have travelled to Xinjiang many times to film our special report. China doesn't like Western journalists asking questions there. They've also been as far afield as Canada, Kazakhstan, Turkey and even here in France to gather first-hand testimony about the treatment of Uyghurs at the hands of the Chinese.
Åbenbart, det har hun ikke været glad for. For det sker igen. Et par år efter, der regner det, og hun skal ud. Og så møder hun så en pige, der hedder Anne-Margrethe, som tjener hos en jødisk familie lidt længere henne. Og Anne-Margrethe, hun går sådan, og hun visker sådan lidt sådan, ja, hvis jeg var dronning, så ville jeg jo ikke gå i sådan et vejr. Og det er jo også sådan en hentydning til det her øgenavn, som Esther har. Og så bliver hun sur og råber, nu går hun på rådstuen, og nu skal hende den anden. Hun skal godt nok komme i hullet, og hun stiller hos politiet med 2 vidner, men der sker altså ikke noget. Anne-Margrethe får en advarsel, og hun kan i øvrigt også fortælle, at alle mennesker kalder klager ind. Altså Esther for dronning Esther. Så på det her tidspunkt, 1787, altså samtidig med det her stik, som vi så med prins Kør ud, der gik med sin store mave i kongens have, der har hun altså, og nu går hun på rådstuen, og nu skal hende den anden. Hun skal godt nok komme i hullet, og hun stiller hos politiet med 2 vidner, men der sker altså ikke noget. Anne-Margrethe får en advarsel, og hun kan i øvrigt også fortælle, at alle mennesker
This guy found an absolutely electrical connection.
Censor seemed powerless to stop them.
There's a huge smuggling industry of semi-legal or totally illegal pamphlet literature coming out of Holland, coming out of London, coming out of Switzerland. A group of extremely unscrupulous, kind of scandalmonger journalists decide they can really make a fortune by slagging her off, as we would say in the British Army.